So, let's begin. Tyler, are we good? All right. I'd like to start off with what might be perceived as the requisite thank yous, but really we mean it because we can't do this without the help of these people. I'll start with our media partner for tonight, who's actually producing this talk for us, both in terms of its live streaming and its recording and all the sound equipment and everything else. That's Mitosis, and they're from here in Dayton. Thank you very much, Mitosis, for all your help. It always makes life easier. Our hospitality partner for tonight is a place called Sueño/Tender Mercies, to host our artist dinners over the next year. Thank you to those folks. I would actually like to extend a really heartfelt thank you to Dr. Robert Brandt Jr., who is not here tonight, who helps us in ways that are kind of beyond description. He helps us in terms of the spirit of this place. He helps us financially. The first HIV/AIDS clinic in Dayton, Ohio, and he has, over his lifetime, done extraordinary work, and now he's transferred that energy to helping us, of all things. So, Dr. Robert Brandt Jr., thank you very, very much. And then I'd like to thank the people that actually made is Jeffrey Cortland Jones, who helped me install the show, and Ethan Rucker, who helped me install the show, and to a certain degree, George himself. But this is important because these shows, it's really funny how shows like this seem to be about the erasure of all labor. They look like they just sort of fell out of the sky. And sort of found a perfect point of purchase in this space, but in fact, they're arduous to install, and I couldn't have done it without Jeff Jones and without Ethan Rucker. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd also like to thank, lastly, Eva Budicavoli, who's our director, and our entire staff, for that matter, Sydney King, Allison Messer, Paula McLaughlin. Eva is, again, couldn't be here tonight for family reasons, but she makes all of this happen. So thank you to everyone that works here. So let me start with a thing that is not written down anywhere. It's a really important part of this exhibition, in my estimation, but it didn't enter the didactics of the show at all. Not in any gallery guide, not in any wall signage. It's just this thing that's in the air, which is how all of these artists, which is to say George Rush, Beverly Fishman, and Mary Reed Kelly and Patrick Kelly, are all linked pedagogically. They have all either taught or learned from each other, which I think is kind of an interesting thing. I've known Bev for a long time, for 20 years. I've known Bev for longer than that, because Bev taught George at MICA when he was an undergraduate, when you were 17. Although I was in the sculpture department at Cranbrook, Bev taught me a lot at Cranbrook. Bev also taught Patrick Kelly at Cranbrook, and George taught Mary Reed Kelly at Yale. So we're at this knot of pedagogy, which may come to bear in the show if you choose to see it, I guess. But what I think really the three shows are about are a kind of a celebration of what I would call the quotidian pathologies of life. These everyday things that are actually, when taken together, are enormous and enormously important in terms of how they consume our lives. In the case of Beverly Fishman's work, all of this work that we are sitting amid is based on big pharma and pharmaceuticals. So the forms are actually from pharmaceuticals, and the colors are uniquely Bev's, but they really do point to this idea that pharmaceutical companies use color and shape to brand what they sell to us all, to keep selling it to us all. And they sell it to us in the billions and billions and billions of dollars. I won't ask for a show of hands, but my guess is that we all take something. And I think it's both I think Bev's perspective is that she recognizes the benefits of some of these drugs, but also recognizes how they exist as a kind of pathology in what might be described as an over-medicated culture, and how we're sold this stuff to remain, among other things, mildly happy. George's work, on the other hand, is a project that is made up in the next room of 204 paintings that were made over the course of 3 years that, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of begin just before the pandemic, were made largely during the pandemic, and kind of document the last 4 or 5 months that might be described as post-pandemic, although no. This weird term that has been bandied about is the new normal, which doesn't seem normal at all. And I think George has all the paintings are taken from cell phone photos that you had taken in walks through your neighborhood, drives through your city, which is Columbus, Ohio. George teaches painting at Ohio State University, and that transpired over 3 years while he was also making other paintings. So I would say what that points to is the fact that Bev taught George, among other things, to work. In fact, what I recall about Bev at Cranbrook is that the one thing that could not be tolerated is if you did not work. And it's something that has stayed with me. I'm currently in therapy and working through it, though. And Mary Reed Kelly and Patrick Kelly look at the pathologies of the human condition through a more historical lens, and they really look at the way violence and tyranny and misogyny are used to control people. And they do it in a way that's a little disarming, but a little scary too. And it's become a vocabulary that they have kind of perfected. So if you have not yet been in the video room in the back, it's called I'm Jackson Pollock, and it is a litany of boasts that really tell a deeply historical story about injustice. But let's begin our talk. So I'm going to start with you, George.
Is this on?
Yes. Can George be heard? Great. I'm the only one.
My constant concern if I can be heard.
So I've come to look at this in the most simple terms as an album of the last 3 years that, for me, have been, anyway, kind of a fugue state. And I'm curious about your reaction to that perspective.
Thanks, and also thank you, for everything that you've done to make this show possible, and for those really nice and thoughtful words. Yeah, you described it pretty well. I mean, I for many years had been making large paintings that were completely fabricated out of an archive of pictures that mostly came from books and magazines. And I was making large installations with wall paintings, et cetera. But in 2019, 2018-19, I was going back and forth to Florida from Columbus almost once a month to see my mother, who has been descending into Alzheimer's. And she's sort of one of the subtexts in that group of paintings, or maybe 6 or 7 paintings of her. And I no longer had the ability to kind of focus on making big things. But I was driving in Columbus and driving in Tampa and taking the plane and spending time walking the dog, and as we all do, carrying around a camera. And I just started photographing everything and started to realize that that could be some work. And it wasn't like a sort of predetermined intention, but I do think that just it became, as my friend Jamil Paulin put it, a kind of ethnography of one particular sort of vision of our current time. And you know, I grew up in New York and I didn't learn to drive till I was 35, and so for me, I'm still trying to figure out what Columbus is as well, and driving is still sort of exotic to me. And so the car and the scale of the car in relationship to our surroundings is a big part of the show as well.
I'm curious at what point you started to see this body of work as what it is here, a collection of over 200 paintings.
I think in I've lost all track of time. I don't know if that's, yeah.
We have all lost track of time.
But at some point, I think about a year and a half ago, my friend and colleague Carmen Wynant came to the studio, and I had maybe 70 paintings done or something, and we were talking about sort of accumulation and the power of accumulation. And if you know Carmen's work, that's a strategy that she often deploys. And she said something like, well, wouldn't it be great if there were 200 of these? And then she left, and I thought, oh, I like having a challenge, and it's nice to get an order from someone else. So that became kind of the target then. And I wanted it to be too complicated to be able to grasp at one time. So there are a couple stories that intersect. You know, the story of suburban America, the story of the scale of the car, the story of a sort of very personal story around family. There's some paintings of that have to do with teaching, and then there are these books that sort of add a kind of poetry.
So Bev, the quotidian quality of your work is decidedly different, although I would argue that it's just as palpable in that we all take something every day, even if it's as innocuous as Tylenol, but in most cases we're all taking something for something. So just as George's work is a chronicle of the last 3 years, I see your work as a chronicle of a culture deeply immersed in pharmaceuticals and sort of oblivious to how they're being manipulated by big pharma. And then also there's this other history that's woven into it, which is kind of the history of painting and the question about what a painting can actually be, which is the thing I'm endlessly fascinated with. So whereas George to me is, forgive me, the mask you wear is that of an academic painter, but that's not what you are at all. You are sort of also looking deeply into the mechanisms of painting, along with the mechanisms of big pharma. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes. Thank you for that, Michael. He made it so simple for me.
I have never, ever known Bev to simply answer yes and stop. It should be said.
Did you ask me a question?
Yeah, when did the work begin for you as a meditation on big pharma?
1999. Literally 1999. But before that, in the 80s, I was dealing with a question, who am I? And it became not what we look like, but everything under the skin. So I was very much interested in science, medicine, and technology, and how technology imaged us. So back in the 80s, before the computer was available, we saw images of underneath the skin through going to a specialized medical bookstore to find very expensive books on photography of the viscera as well as the microscopic imagery. So imagine before the computer, I would stand at a medical store spending $300 on a book so I could rip it up and get one image of a cell, or I was interested in the viscera. What interests me in medicine is, and it's specifically about those books, was there was always an image, and this is the microscopic books. There was an image of one or two unhealthy cells. No, there was an image of one healthy cell, and the rest of the book was on disease. And I thought, that's really interesting how medicine focuses on, in Western medicine, focuses on imagery of disease. People weren't very interested in what I was interested in at that time, and thought it was grotesque that I was looking under the skin, but I was very much interested in what joined us all together, and yet what absolutely separated us. So for example, if you have family members that you're the tallest, you're the shortest, you're the smartest, you have every disease known to mankind while your two other siblings are as healthy, as they can be. I was interested in how the cell could mutate and create a cataclysmic occurrence. So even though the work looked abstract, it was very much rooted in medicine, history, culture. When I got to 1999, what was going on in society was, I found very fascinating, specifically amongst women, because for a lot of women who had PMS, which years before, PMS was only in our head until PMS was described as actually hormonal and could be treated by medicine. So I was well aware of how you could be identified by something as simple as a woman or a man, or you have this particular issue that people say doesn't exist until people decide it does exist. So, for example, and then I'll just go on and on because I'm obsessed with this stuff, okay? How the hell do adults have ADHD now? When 10 years ago, no adults had ADHD. That's because Big Pharma got together with some scientists and doctors and said, yes, adults have ADHD. Now, I don't even want to ask how many people now as adults have been diagnosed with ADHD. But you can thank Big Pharma for that, as far as I'm concerned. I am not against Big Pharma. I am against people not understanding the medications they're on or making decisions with the doctor, not the doctor up here looking down upon us to tell us what medicines we need and what our problems are. So obsession for me, it goes deep. I'm willing to duke it out. There's a lot of research that I could find on the web, and women started talking to each other for the first time about medicines that they were on in the late 90s. So when you went to a party, no one discussed medication. Did a girlfriend say to you, what meds are you on? Never. It was taboo. And in 1999, something shifted. And Prozac, I believe, shifted it. Okay? There were articles talking about be happy. Why did we need to be happy? We didn't need to be happy. We needed to be productive. Because our corporations, our bosses did not allow for downtime. For example, my ex-partner, his mother passed away suddenly. He worked at a nonprofit. We thought, oh, they'll understand. He had 3 days to bury his mother, get over it, and go back to work. 3 days. Now, we all have had deaths in our family. We all understand it takes sometimes a lifetime to get over, but 3 days is not enough. So women, I'm talking about women talking to women intimately about how not to be depressed, how to be able to work 7 days a week, 5 days a week no longer works for us anymore, and that sort of thing. And so I think pharma started permeating our day-to-day lives more and more in the 90s. And the thing that shifted radically for me was I was at dinner, and then I'll stop. I was at dinner, and I had a headache. And my girlfriend took out the pill things that, everybody knows what they, has all the pills. She said, I have vitamins, I have, it was crazy. I mean, it was 1999. I have vitamins, I have Vicodin, and I have everything in between. What do you want? I was like, what? You're carrying this around in your handbag? And this told me more about her than I ever knew or understood about her.
I would assume that you went for the Vicodin, right?
Never took Vicky D.
Okay. Vicky D.
That's what I call it.
Okay. Everyone write that down. That's.
I have my own nicknames for certain drugs.
Actually, I wanted to talk with both of you about two drastically different processes in terms of painting too. So for George, I know that all of these images come from cell phone photos, but for me, they're really less a treatise on the transference of that media, the cell phone photo, to painting than they are about sort of capturing the rhythms of suburbia and middle America. So really it's a curatorial process more than it is almost a painting process, although the painting part of it I know is really deeply important to you. Your primary medium for those paintings are acrylic gouache, and I'm just curious about, one question I would have about those paintings is the cadence of them. How long per painting on average?
I don't know.
We'll leave it at that.
I love seeing this wall of Bev's drawings because I think that way a lot. And so I start many at a time, and in part that's just because I can't ever think from beginning to end in something. And I also am really, really interested in how images speak to each other. So, and for this project, I mean, it's always been like this, but I don't really think in singular images. I think sort of across images. And I think about how painting creates a conversation, seeing this triptych or seeing these paintings in relationship to each other, for me, is really important. And I think a lot of artists feel that way. And yet we make these things that get sort of split up and thrown around, and you see a singular thing. And like for me, I'm very interested in modernism and how so many modernist painters created a kind of vocabulary within their work. And, Mondrian. Right? So I start many at a time, and, there may be another 200 or so or 150 that are in various states of unfinishedness because they just never made it. I lost track of the question, but I don't know how long it takes. I also have different speeds of painting, so I'll be too agitated to slow down. So I'll start 10 at a time, and then put them out on a table, and then one of them sort of is more interesting than the others, and pick it up and sort of get into it. So yeah.
Well, the question actually was to frame a question about your painting process, because your body language there was just Just is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't.
A
that
lot
body
of wrist,
language-
a lot of wrist action, George.
It's all in the wrist.
Very well practiced.
But I would argue that your process has nothing to do with this.
No, it has everything to do with that. Because I make those collages, and that's how I figure out the shape and form and the color that the work is going to be. So you're seeing a small selection of works. Sometimes there's 3 and I hit the jackpot on one of them and I love it, and then sometimes there's 10 collages of the same form where I'm still looking for something. Sometimes I find nothing. You know, I'm like, everything I make is not going to be something that turns into more of an object. So I think in some way there's a kind of intuition that both of us are using, even though my work, you don't see you see the intuition, I hope, through the collages.
So the commonality would be drawing, probably. In a funny way, drawing manifests all the way through your process, I would assume. It's kind of...
No, drawing is an interesting term and an interesting practice, but I don't know if my paintings are drawings. They're on paper. I don't even know if they're paintings, to be honest. I think that they're sort of a hybrid of paintings and photography. They couldn't exist without the cell phone and the photographs. I print, they're a little bit fake in the sense that I take I have 40,000 cell phone photographs from the past few years on my iCloud, right? And I choose one out of, dozens, hundreds, and then I turn it into a line drawing in Photoshop, and then I print that onto the paper, and then I call up the image on a TV screen, and I paint it from observation. But the sort of photographic information is frozen in the drawing.
Right.
So I don't really worry about being sort of academically pure in any way. I'm not interested in that. There is a kind of translation that does happen to a sort of painterly facture and a sort of painterly syntax, certainly. I'm not trying to make them look like paintings of photographs, but they couldn't exist without the photography.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of going towards drawing, which I actually think is almost like antithetical to photography, it's closer to this relationship between painting and photography.
And your process, though, when you have moved past the collages, which I still call drawings, then becomes much more involved with processes that are about building and about collaboration. Although the color sensibilities are definitively yours. We've had many conversations about how some of these are painted over and over again until the color choices are right. And if you look around you, one thing I dread about this show is photographing it. Because getting the color right for the book that we're going to produce is it's a daunting task to do justice to your work as a colorist. And I want to talk a little bit about how, first of all, the paint is urethane.
Yeah, it's car paint. So it's highly toxic. I mean, I work with a painter I've worked with maybe 9 years at this point, I believe, 9 years. I went to a body shop at one point and I had an idea of something. And again, my work is always just like, I have an idea, let me see what I'll do. And then I just go after that. So I wanted to see something made, painted. And I went in and this one painter, I was looking at this really high-end motorcycle and I was like, oh my God, this is so great. And it was purple. And the painter turned to me, one of the painters, and he said, well, it needs a little bit more cyan blue. And I just looked at him, I said, yes, can you paint my thing? And then because I knew he could see color. That he didn't need a formula, you know, to pump out the paint. And then from there, he started working with me, and then I hired him full-time, which I try to hire people full-time so that I'm very impatient. So I don't care if I have nothing to do, I'll pay you to just wait till I'm ready, because when I'm ready, and that's how I roll.
It should be said that in Detroit, you can't throw a rock without hitting a guy who works in a body shop.
That may be true. That may be
finding
true.
the right guy
but
is
you
a
will
different
never
matter.
hear where. You will never hear his name. You will never know anything other than that, because he works full time for me. And if you go near him, we will have it, like, because I have tried so many different people who can't see color. And he literally color matches. If I give him a piece of color, he can color match. Now that is an art. That is a high level of vision. Many, many people can't do it. They say they can do it. They tell me they can do it. I pay for them to do it, and they can't do it. The other issue is, a lot of people, when I say I want it to look like a car, I mean Mercedes. Do you see dents in the Mercedes when it's sitting out? Do you see flecks of irregular paint quality? No. No. It's a level of perfection that very few humans can come close to. This person understands my brain. This person is an extension of my brain. He understands. I love him. Please, dear God, nothing can happen to him.
And ironically, he's likely heavily medicated.
No.
No?
Chain smokes while working with toxic materials. Well, that is a medication.
Yeah. I'm gonna kind of draw this down because I know there are probably questions from all of you, and there's a microphone set up here up front. That's what that's for. But I wanted to point out one thing that actually Patrick said to me yesterday or the day before, which is that one observation he had was that either this room, the drugs in this room is what you take if you're experiencing George's room, or if you experience the sort of the quality of life that are expressed in George's paintings, you end up taking drugs in here. So this is another way in which the two shows, which didn't occur to me until you said that, and I thought, yeah,
it's good.
That's another good.
I think it's accurate to it.
Yeah, and also I like to keep it short because I am not currently medicated for ADHD. So with that, I'd like to, does anyone have a question? Please go up to the microphone, and please don't be shy.
I'll ask one question. So did you prescribe the locations of all the pieces in the grid, or was that left to our genius Michael to do that?
Neither. Yeah. I composed it, but I just did it randomly, or as randomly as I could. So
it all should be said that we're doing a book of George's show that's kind of exciting. It's different than most of our books because it will just be just a litany of the paintings. So there are 204 paintings, so 102 pages of just full bleed paintings, and then an indexable list in the back and an essay.
But I like this is one compositional strategy, and then the book is a different compositional strategy. And really what I tried to do for the composition here was pretty passive, just sort of by feel. There's no narrative to lead you through. And to me, that's actually quite important to the content, that there's repetition, there's slippage between the present and the past.
But each piece stands alone still as well.
Absolutely.
It should be said, though, that, and this is not a thing that we've talked about in any depth, but I would love to find a home for all of them.
We'll give you a good price.
Yeah, there's a deep discount involved if somebody wants to take all of them home. All you need is a room that size.
I don't even care if you have a room that size.
Any other questions?
Yeah, quick question for George. Good to see you, first of all.
Hey, Chris.
So at a certain point, you came to realize, okay, this is becoming a group, this is becoming a collection of works. And so I'm wondering if there was, it's a question of inspiration, I suppose. If at a certain point you said, okay, you start making choices about your images based on what will look good for the whole. Does that happen at a certain point for you? Did it happen at a certain point for you? Do you start to say, well, I've already got one of these book ones, I need another one over here?
Yeah, totally. I can't think of any really interesting anecdotes about that, except yes, that happened. You know, wanting there to be, you know, not just one coming from my academic world, or not just one coming from family. You know, and, there's I think quite a portrait of what I think is a quite striking photograph of my wife, and that was a later addition because it's a experience of her that I have that's really different than seeing her with my child, right? So that type of thinking started to come into it for sure.
A question for George.
You're so much more concise than I am that
You're good, George.
Didn't get to see all of the books, but the titles intrigued me. Was there a certain irony that you were using to choose those how-to books?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I came of age in the 90s, and so I think irony is much more a part of my general vocabulary than kids these days. And so there is yes, there's humor there, there's irony there. A lot of those are from my therapist in his previous location there was this incredible library in the waiting room, and I spent many minutes showing up early and photographing, thinking, wow, and then started also looking for other sources like friends' bookshelves or my parents or self-help section at Half Price Books, things like that. I like thinking of them sort of as you know, conceptual text pieces, but also they're sort of like stripe paintings as well. And so some of them have a bit of like a kind of formality to them, and some of them are much more randomized in terms of the composition.
George's therapist bookshelf is one that I know as well, and we'll leave that at that. Is there a question for Bev about her?
You don't have to.
Gina?
I have so many questions, Bev. I'm just a huge fan. And maybe these aren't quite articulate questions, but when I look at your work, I'm wondering, in terms of your arc as an artist, was there a time, what was that like when you were like, okay, I'm going to just throttle it towards perfection, and I'm going to turn it, the chroma key, just way up? What was going on? Like, what was that transition like in terms of your process as an artist?
The content in my work has always driven the form. So when I dealt with viscera under the body, under the skin, they were so visceral and so expressionistic. But color has always been very sensorial to me. It's been a sensation. And so color for me has always remained a huge component of my thinking. I never meant to go in this direction. Meaning, you know, it's kind of crazy. I made, in 1999, I made these smaller glow-in-the-dark resin pills. By day they were one color, by night they glowed. And they were very raw because they were very handmade. and they had a lot of kind of wrong, they weren't perfect at all. They were very much handmade things. But as I continued to work on this, I was reading more and more about design, more about the allure of perfection, how we as humans want perfection, how the pharmaceutical industry wants us to want perfection, because if we want perfection in ourselves, we will always fail, we will always fall short. There lies the hook into maybe I need a pill, or maybe I'm depressed, or maybe I have anxiety about that. And I was driven by this kind of ever-producing perfect pill, but also I just want to say that it's very important to me that these are made by a person. So that the level of craft very few people have. And I think that's very important in work. These are not machined. They are in fact made by a human who hand sands layer after layer of the surface for 10 days before the paint can even be received. So I'm interested in that kind of heroic level of craft, and I appreciate craft of all, of sort of like everything. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, 110%. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Well,
Melissa.
This is for Beverly. Hey, I'm curious about the significance of the combinations of shapes, and I'm just going to add that sometimes I think of them as like portraits of certain people.
yes.
So I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that.
So what drove the work to become multi-pilled was the culture drugging us, and it's called polypharmacy. In the 50s, polypharmacy really didn't exist, and now I'm in my 60s, and you can find people in their 60s on taking 8 pills a day. By the time you're 80 and you're in a nursing home, because no one is, and the reason why I say nursing home, not at home, is because who is overseeing the medication carefully? You can be on up to 18 pills a day. And we are taking more and more pills. So I was interested in combining what I thought, could be a daily dose for someone, which is alarming, but formally it really it has opened up and challenged me to be making these larger conglomerations. And that one over there, I think, has 5 or, I don't know, I can't see, 8 or something. 7. I'm up to 8, but I was 7. And that's, the content drove this formal. And no, they're honestly not portraits unless you see yourself in them. But a lot of times there's always like an antipsychotic with an antidepressive one. For antidepression, there's always like, there's so many for anxiety. Who doesn't have anxiety today? Who didn't have anxiety has anxiety with COVID. Depression is on the rise. Taking medication for depression and for anxiety is on the rise, as well as overdoses in COVID. Extreme rise in deaths by overdosing on medications. So we're so much more aware of medication now because of COVID, right? It's in you pick up the New York Times, it's every day there's an article. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? One last question, maybe?
We'll be around. Hi, Sydney.
Hi guys, again. This is a smaller question, but I still am curious to know because I love how your works on paper, Beverly, and your works, George, none of them have glass on them or plexiglass, and I adore that. And I just want to know if that was deliberately done for you, Michael, too, or for both of you.
Well, George and I discussed how, like, this overwhelming glare might be a distraction from the paintings, and we went back and forth, and I think ultimately George decided that not glazing them both gave you an appreciation for the material, both the acrylic gouache and the paper. And then I started very, very recently talking to Bev about the same issue, and really wanting, for me, understanding those things under a glazing would be much harder than it is understanding them just without the glass between you and the paper and the duct tape.
Because I like that it invites you to look closer.
It makes me a little nervous, quite honestly. So no one is allowed to touch anything, unfortunately. Although it is my yen to touch everything. But but it's art.
It's okay, Michael. It's okay. We have touched Michael together.
But I don't like to be.
Let's hang out.
Thank you. Thank you.